The lake was where I always went when I needed to disappear. It wasn't far from town, just a quiet stretch of water, edged by pines and half forgotten by anyone who didn't grow up nearby. People called it a fishing spot, but for me it was more like a hiding spot. The kind of place where silence didn't feel empty, where you could sit with your thoughts and let the world move on without you for a while. That afternoon, the water was smooth, reflecting the pale September sky. My line made small ripples every time I shifted the rod, and for a while, I was convinced I was alone. It was exactly what I wanted. No voices, no questions, no expectations. Just me, the lake, and the weight of the day sliding off my shoulders. But then, when I glanced across to the other side of the water, I saw someone sitting on the dock. He was leaning back with his legs stretched out, a fishing pole balanced loosely in his hands. At first, I thought maybe it was some stranger, a hunter or one of the old guys from town who liked to drink cheap beer by the water. But then he lifted his head and I froze. It was Daniel, my brother's best friend. I hadn't seen him in months, maybe longer. We'd grown up in the same orbit. Him always around our house, crashing on the couch after late nights with my brother, sneaking into the kitchen at 2 a.m. like he belonged there. Back then, I was just the younger tag-along, the kid brother who wasn't old enough to get the jokes or stay up as late. But now, things were different. I was 22, no longer a kid. And Daniel, he must have been 26, 27. Older sure, but not distant. Not untouchable. He noticed me almost instantly. His head tilted slightly, eyes narrowing like he was trying to place me, then softening in recognition. I expected a wave. Maybe even a casual, hey. But he didn't move, didn't speak. He just looked. And it wasn't the kind of look you brush off. It was steady, too steady, like he was trying to figure out why I was there, or maybe why he was suddenly so aware of me being there. I felt it in my chest, in the way my stomach tightened. I didn't wave either. Something about the moment felt too fragile, like moving too quickly would break it. So I just held his gaze until I couldn't anymore and turned back to the water. For a while, I tried to pretend he wasn't there. I cast my line again, focused on the stillness of the lake. But it was useless. Every sound, the creak of his dock, the quiet scrape of his reel, reminded me he was close, even if there were yards of water between us. The air felt different now. Charged, like a storm waiting at the edges of the sky. I caught myself stealing glances. Watching the curve of his shoulders, the way he leaned forward when his line twitched, the quiet patience in the way he sat. He wasn't the same guy I remembered from my brother's parties. Back then he'd been loud, always cracking jokes, always the center of the room. But here now he seemed quieter, older. Like the years had smoothed the edges of him into something softer. And every time I thought I was being subtle, I'd look up to find his eyes already on me. Not glaring. Not teasing. Just watching. I should have looked away quicker. Should have pretended it didn't matter. But the truth was I couldn't. There was something about the way he looked at me that made the air feel heavier, that made the lake feel smaller. Minutes stretched into hours, or at least it felt that way. The sun dipped lower, staining the water gold, and still we didn't speak. We just fished on opposite sides of the lake, tied together by glances neither of us admitted to. When I thought about leaving, I found myself hesitating. My watch said I'd been there long enough. But something inside me said stay. So I stayed. And then, just as the first chill of evening touched the air, my line jerked hard. For a second, I thought I'd hooked the biggest fish of my life. I braced myself, gripping the rod, pulling back. But whatever I'd snagged didn't thrash like a fish. The resistance was steady, almost human. I tugged again. And across the water, Daniel tugged too. We froze, staring at each other as the realization sank in. Our lines had crossed. For the first time that day, his voice carried across the lake, deep, low, amused. "Guess we caught each other," he called. It was supposed to be a joke. Just a throwaway line. But the way his mouth curved into a smile, the way his eyes didn't leave mine even after he laughed, it felt like the start of something I didn't yet have words for. And standing there on the bank, with my heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fishing, I knew this night wasn't going to end the way it started. I followed the pull of the line around the lake's edge, and so did he. By the time we met in the middle, the sun was sliding low, painting everything in shades of orange and rose. The mess between us was laughable, two lines tangled like vines, loops knotted so tightly it would take more patience than either of us had. Daniel crouched first, resting his pole on the ground and taking the line in his hands. "You always tie your hook like this?" he asked, inspecting my end like he had caught me breaking some unspoken rule. I huffed a laugh, kneeling beside him. "Worked fine until now. Until you hooked me." He smirked, not looking up. There was something about the way he said it, not teasing exactly but not neutral either. I tried to ignore the way my chest tightened at the words. Our hands brushed almost immediately as we started working the knot. His were rougher than mine, fingertips nicked and calloused, but his touch was gentle, deliberate. Every time his fingers grazed mine, I felt it linger, like heat spreading out from the smallest point of contact. We sat too close for strangers but too far for what the moment felt like. His shoulder brushed mine once, then again, and I didn't move away. Neither did he. The knot was stubborn, and Daniel leaned in closer, his breath brushing my cheek as he muttered under it. I swallowed hard, pretending to focus on the tangle, but all I could think about was how close he was. The smell of pine on his shirt. The quiet sound of him exhaling. I finally glanced up. He was already watching me. For half a second, neither of us blinked. The look wasn't playful, it wasn't a joke like so many of his expressions used to be. It was steady, serious, and it pinned me in place. I dropped my eyes first, clearing my throat. "Think we'll have to cut it." "We'll get it," he murmured. His voice was softer than before, almost quiet enough to lose to the sound of the water. The silence between us stretched, heavy and thick. And yet it didn't feel awkward. It felt like standing on the edge of something neither of us had words for. Eventually the lines came free, the last knot slipping loose under his thumb. But instead of pulling back, we both stayed where we were, still crouched side by side, knees touching. "You always come out here?" he asked, finally breaking the quiet. "Sometimes. When I need to think." He nodded, winding his line slowly. "Same." The answer surprised me. I never pictured him as the kind of guy who needed quiet. Back when I was younger, he filled every space with noise, jokes, stories, the kind of energy that demanded attention. But here now, sitting this close, he seemed carved out of calm. I wanted to ask what he came here to think about, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, we both sat back against the dock post, letting our legs dangle over the edge. His shoulder pressed into mine again, firmer this time. No apology followed. It should have been nothing. Two people sitting too close. But the way the air shifted, the way my skin burned where his arm brushed mine, I knew it wasn't. At one point, I risked another glance at him. His profile was caught in the glow of the sunset, jaw sharp, lips curved faintly like he knew something I didn't. And just as I was about to look away, his eyes flicked to mine again. Too close. Too long. And yet I didn't move. Neither did he. The lines were free, the excuse to sit together was gone, but neither of us stood. The night folded around us, the light fading, and I couldn't shake the thought that echoed in my head with every brush of his shoulder against mine. This is too close to be nothing. The sun slipped behind the trees, and the lake shifted into shades of blue and silver. The kind of twilight that made everything softer, quieter, as if the world itself was holding its breath. We hadn't said a word in minutes. We didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't empty, it was full, humming with something neither of us dared name. Daniel leaned back on his palms, eyes fixed on the horizon where the last trace of light burned faintly. His jaw was relaxed, his shoulders loose, but there was a tension underneath, the kind you notice only when you're close enough to see the little things. The way his thumb tapped against the wood of the dock, the way his chest rose a fraction deeper than normal. I wanted to ask him what he was thinking. The question sat heavy on my tongue, but I kept it there. Because maybe I didn't really want to hear the answer. "You ever feel," he said suddenly, voice low, "like you're waiting on something, but you don't even know what?" The word startled me. I turned toward him, but his eyes stayed on the water, like he couldn't risk looking at me just yet. "Yeah," I said softer than I meant to. "All the time." The corners of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a frown. He nodded once, slowly, as if my answer was enough. The silence fell again, but it was different now. He had cracked something open, and I couldn't stop myself from peeking inside. I studied him in the fading light. The curve of his brow, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the steady line of his throat as he swallowed. I realized with a start that I wasn't just looking at him. I was memorizing him. The thought unsettled me. I shifted slightly, trying to give myself space, but the dock was narrow and our shoulders brushed again. Neither of us moved away. The night air cooled, carrying the scent of pine and damp wood. A loon called in the distance, its echo low and haunting. The sound stretched out between us and I felt my chest ache in a way I couldn't explain. "Your brother still talk about me?" Daniel asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "Sometimes," I said. "Not much lately." "Why?" He shrugged, his gaze still locked on the water. "Just wondered if he ever noticed when I wasn't around." There was a heaviness in his tone I hadn't expected. Not regret exactly, but something close. I wanted to tell him I noticed. that I'd noticed every time. But the words stuck in my throat, too heavy to lift. Instead I said nothing. And somehow, that silence felt louder than anything I could have said. The dock creaked under us as we shifted slightly, our knees brushing now. I thought about pulling away, but my body refused. The contact was too small to mean anything, and yet it meant everything. Daniel finally turned his head, his eyes finding mine in the dim light. For a heartbeat, I thought he might actually say it, whatever was hanging between us. But he didn't. He just looked, his expression unreadable, steady, like he was waiting for me to be the one to break. I couldn't. Not yet. So we sat there, both of us caught in the weight of silence that wasn't silence at all. It was a conversation we weren't ready to have, a truth neither of us was brave enough to touch. But when his shoulder pressed into mine again, firm and certain, I didn't move. And neither did he. Something had changed. I felt it in the quiet, in the steady thrum of my pulse, in the way the night wrapped around us like a secret. The silence between us wasn't nothing. It was everything. And we both knew it. The stars had begun to scatter across the lake's surface, reflections trembling whenever the wind stirred. Daniel shifted beside me, stretching his arms above his head before pushing himself to his feet. "Come on," he said quietly, offering his hand down to me. "You'll freeze sitting here." I hesitated for half a second, then slipped my hand into his. His grip was warm, firm, steady in a way that made my pulse skip. When he pulled me up, he didn't let go right away. It should have been nothing, just a hand helping another up. But it wasn't. His thumb pressed lightly against my palm, almost absent-minded, and for a moment we just stood there, connected. My breath caught, and I wondered if he noticed the way my chest rose quicker, the way my fingers almost tightened back around his. Then just as suddenly he released me. But the absence of his touch lingered like a shadow, sharp and aching. We walked side by side down the dock, our footsteps hollow against the wood. The air was cooler now, tinged with pine and the faint sweetness of damp earth. Every time his arm swung close to mine, I felt it like a spark. When we reached the tree line, he stopped. I turned to look at him, half expecting words, but he stayed silent, studying me with that same unreadable expression. The stars lit only half his face, the other side swallowed in darkness. His eyes, though, caught the faintest glint of light, steady, unwavering. Then, without warning, he reached up and brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. The gesture was small. Innocent even. But his fingers stayed longer than they should have, trailing just a second too long, soft against my skin. My throat tightened. Every instinct told me not to move, not to breathe, afraid of shattering the moment. When he finally pulled back, his hand fell to his side, and he cleared his throat as if nothing had happened. "Bugs are out," he muttered, glancing toward the woods. I almost laughed at the excuse, but the sound caught somewhere inside me. Because we both knew that wasn't what had just passed between us. We started walking again, the dirt path narrow enough that our shoulders brushed with every step. At first I thought it was coincidence, but the third time, the fourth time, I realized it wasn't. He wasn't moving away. Neither was I. The silence grew heavier, louder than any words we could have managed. My chest ached with it, but I didn't dare speak. When we reached the gravel where his truck was parked, he stopped again. I turned, and for a second I thought he might finally say it, whatever had been building all night. His lips parted, his jaw tightened like he was fighting himself. But nothing came. Instead, he looked at me the way he had across the lake earlier, steady, unblinking, like the air between us had shrunk to nothing. I felt myself lean forward before I even realized it, just a fraction, just enough to feel the pull of him. But he stepped back, just slightly, breaking the tension without breaking eye contact. The moment collapsed, but it didn't disappear. It lingered, thick and undeniable, like the echo of a touch that refused to fade. He reached for his keys, jangling them in his hand like a distraction. "You want a ride back?" I nodded, my voice gone, my body still humming with the ghost of his hand against my skin. We climbed into the truck, the cab warm and smelling faintly of pine and engine oil. He turned the ignition, the headlights cutting through the trees, but for a long time neither of us spoke. I pressed my palm against my leg, where the heat of his hand still lingered, and thought. Some touches fade the second they're gone. But some stay. And I knew this one wasn't going anywhere. The hum of the truck's engine filled the silence. Outside, the night blurred into streaks of trees and open fields, broken only by the occasional glint of starlight through the windshield. Daniel kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the console between us. I sat angled toward the window, trying to look casual, but my eyes kept flicking to that hand. His fingers tapped lightly against the plastic as if he were restless, but he didn't move it. Not away. Not closer. Just there. The air felt thick, too full for words. My chest rose too quickly, like I'd forgotten how to breathe the way I used to. Finally he spoke. "Tonight, it doesn't feel like nothing." The words hit harder than I expected. My head turned before I could stop myself. His eyes were on the road, steady, but his voice carried a weight that left no room for misunderstanding. I swallowed, my throat dry. "No," I said, softer than a whisper. "It doesn't." He didn't look at me, not yet. But the set of his jaw shifted, like the truth of it had unsettled him as much as it did me. For a long moment, the only sound was the engine and the gravel crunching under the tires as we pulled off the road, stopping at the edge of another clearing. He killed the engine and the sudden silence pressed in like a blanket. The headlights dimmed, leaving us in the soft glow of the dashboard. I could see him more clearly now, his face caught in the faint light, his eyes unreadable. He leaned back against the seat, letting out a slow breath. His hand stayed on the console, fingers splayed, waiting. I mirrored him without thinking. My hand slid across until my fingertips brushed his. The smallest touch, but it felt like setting fire to dry kindling. We didn't speak. Our fingers shifted, hesitant, until his palm met mine fully. The warmth of it spread up my arm, steady and grounding, like something I didn't know I'd been waiting for. My chest ached with the question I'd been carrying all night. It slipped out before I could stop it. What if this is real? The words hung between us, fragile and trembling. He turned to me, then really turned, his eyes catching mine in the dim light. His lips parted like he was about to answer, but nothing came. Instead, he gave my hand the faintest squeeze. I felt my breath stutter, my chest tight. Neither of us leaned forward. Neither of us rushed. It was too fragile, too new, to shatter with anything sudden. Instead, we let the silence carry it, let the weight of our joined hands say what we weren't ready to speak. I wanted to kiss him, not out of impulse but because it felt like the truest thing I could do. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he leaned forward until his forehead rested gently against mine. The contact was soft, careful, but it spoke louder than anything else could. His breath mingled with mine, warm in the quiet cab, and my eyes fell shut. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't even a confession. But it was everything. When he pulled back only an inch, his voice was barely audible. "Then maybe it is." The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was full, like the air itself had shifted, like the world outside the truck had fallen away and left just this: two hands, a shared breath, and a truth that felt too big to ignore. And for the first time that night, I didn't feel afraid. The night outside the truck was still, the kind of stillness where even the trees seemed to be listening. Inside, the world was small. The faint glow of the dashboard, the warmth of his hand in mine, the ghost of his forehead against mine lingering in the space between us. Neither of us moved for a long while. We just sat there, our breaths sinking slowly, the silence no longer tense but calm. Sacred even. Finally, Daniel leaned back against the seat, his hands still tangled with mine. He let out a soft laugh, barely more than a breath. "I didn't see this coming." "Me either," I admitted. My voice felt steadier than I expected, like saying it out loud grounded me instead of unraveling me. He glanced at me then, the corner of his mouth twitching into the faintest smile. "Guess we're both bad at fishing." I laughed, the sound cutting through the quiet, and his eyes softened like he was glad to hear it. We slipped into easy conversation after that, the kind we'd never had before. He told me about the job he hated but couldn't quite leave, about the way he sometimes drove out here after long nights just to breathe. I told him about school, about the pressure of expectations I didn't even know I wanted to live up to. The kind of things you don't share at family dinners or with friends who only half listen. The kind of things that came out only because the night, the truck, the joined hands made them safe. Every so often one of us would fall quiet and the silence would stretch. But it wasn't heavy anymore. It was warm, the kind of silence that held you instead of pressing down on you. At one point he tilted his head back, eyes closed, lips parted slightly as if he was just letting go. I watched him longer than I should have, memorizing the curve of his lashes, the way his chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. And I realized something. I hadn't known I was waiting for this. For him. For a moment where being near someone felt less like a question and more like an answer. When his eyes opened, they caught mine instantly. I didn't look away. He shifted closer, not much, just enough that our shoulders pressed more firmly together. His thumb brushed across the back of my hand once, slow and deliberate, and the gesture sent a rush of warmth through me. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, I couldn't tell. Time had slipped into something softer, stretched thin by the weight of the moment. Then, gently, he leaned forward again, his forehead finding mine like it belonged there. I let my eyes close, my breath catching as his settled against mine. We stayed like that, no urgency, no rush to turn it into something more. Just the closeness, the quiet press of skin to skin, the sound of our breaths mingling in the dark. It wasn't a kiss. It didn't need to be. It was something else entirely. Something that felt like the beginning of everything. When he finally pulled back, his voice was low, almost reverent. You know, I don't think I ever knew what I was waiting for. I smiled, small and unsteady but sure. Me neither. And in the quiet that followed, I understood. Maybe we'd both been waiting for this all along. Night blurred into something dreamlike. I don't know how long we stayed in that truck, speaking in low voices, drifting in and out of silences that felt softer each time they came. At some point, my head rested against the glass, his hand still tangled with mine, the warmth between us unbroken. When the first pale streaks of dawn broke across the sky, I noticed it before he did. The horizon softened from black to gray, then bled slowly into silver and faint gold. The lake outside shimmered as if it had been holding its breath all night, waiting for light. Daniel shifted, his arm brushing mine. He blinked against the morning, then gave a quiet groan, running a hand through his hair. Did we really stay here all night? Yeah, I said, my voice still hushed. Guess we did. He looked at me, then really looked, his eyes clearer in the morning light, softer somehow. He didn't let go of my hand. If anything, his grip tightened just slightly, as though the daylight might take something away that the night had given us. We sat in that stillness for a while, both of us watching the sun climb. Eventually he let out a low laugh. You realize your brother would kill me if he knew I kept you out here all night. I smiled faintly, glancing down at our hands. Then maybe don't tell him. Maybe, he echoed, his voice quiet but carrying something beneath it, something close to hope. When we finally climbed out of the truck, the air was cool and sharp, carrying the damp sweetness of dew. The gravel crunched under our boots as we walked back toward the dock. Neither of us rushed. Our steps fell in rhythm, shoulders brushing now and then, deliberate in the way neither of us moved away. Halfway there, his fingers brushed mine again. I didn't think he would reach for me in daylight, not when the world could see. But he did. Slowly, like testing the strength of glass, he laced his fingers with mine. It wasn't for long, just a few steps, just enough to remind me the night hadn't been a dream. But it was enough. We sat again on the dock, the boards cool beneath us. The lake stretched out in front of us, alive now with light and movement, but I barely noticed. All I saw was him, his elbows resting on his knees, his profile sharp against the sun. What now? I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. He watched the water, his jaw tightening, his breath deepening, as if the question was bigger than either of us could hold. Finally he turned to me. His eyes weren't guarded anymore. They were open, vulnerable, as if he'd dropped the last defense he had. Whatever this becomes, he said. His voice was steady, but the way his fingers brushed against mine again gave away the tremor underneath. We'll figure it out. Something in me eased at that. Not because it was a promise, it wasn't, but because it was real. Honest. I nodded, letting out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Yeah. Whatever this becomes. We didn't need more than that. The sun climbed higher, scattering gold across the water. He told me a story about the first time he came to this lake with my brother, how they'd fallen in trying to impress each other, how they'd gone home drenched and laughing. I laughed too, the sound easier now, and he smiled at me like it meant something to see me laugh. After a while, the world woke up around us. A bird cutting low across the water, the distant sound of a car on the highway. The spell of the night gave way to the ordinary, but it didn't feel like loss. It felt like something new. Eventually he stood, stretching, and offered his hand again. I took it without hesitation, letting him pull me up. This time when he let go, I didn't feel that ache of absence. Because now I knew it wasn't the last time. Back at his truck, he opened the door for me, then hesitated. His eyes searched mine, like he was trying to find the right words but couldn't. In the end he didn't speak. He just reached up, his hand brushing my cheek, slow and careful. The touch lingered, longer than the night before, longer than what could be mistaken for anything else. I leaned into it just slightly, enough to let him know I wasn't pulling away. Then he dropped his hand, stepping back, his face soft with something I couldn't name. The drive back into town was quiet, but not in the way it had been before. It was easy now. Comfortable. His hand rested on the console again, close enough that I knew if I wanted to, I could reach for it. And I almost did. When he pulled into my driveway, the house still dark and silent, he cut the engine and turned to me. His eyes held mine, steady, almost searching. I'll see you, he said. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't an end. It was something in between, The kind of words that leave the door open. I nodded, my chest warm. Yeah. See you. I stepped out, the gravel crunching under my boots, the early light cool on my skin. I didn't look back until I reached the porch. When I did, he was still there, one hand on the wheel, watching. I lifted a hand in a small wave. He gave one back, then drove off slowly, the sound of his truck fading into the morning. Standing there, I let out a breath, the memory of his touch still soft against my cheek. I hadn't expected any of this. I hadn't asked for it. But as the sun broke fully over the trees, spilling light across everything, I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't undo it for anything.